U.S. officials are closely monitoring developments in Iran on what is a Muslim holy day of prayer. A senior hardline Iranian cleric is imploring the regime to follow through with executions of detained demonstrators. Here's senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott.
Iranian leaders capping off their deadly crackdown against anti-regime protesters with a new warning today. An appointee of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei at Friday prayers in Tehran declaring armed hypocrites should be put to death, also branding the protesters Trump's soldiers. The death toll from the regime's brutal response nearing 2,800, according to a U.S.-based human rights group. Eyewitnesses from Iran say the security forces' gunfire was strong.
They were heavy weapons, heavy machine guns. I heard a lot of it.
Along with those killed, many more injured, and according to the government, 3,000 arrested. While only scattered protests were reported today, the regime's internet blackout inside the country remains in place, causing others outside to root them on, including the son of the late deposed Shah of Iran.
The people of Iran have reason to reclaim their country. History will honor those who stand with them,
including the Trump administration, which, according to Fox News sources, is moving military assets closer to the region. Still, while these protests are called the strongest since the Islamic Republic's founding, so far at least, there are no major cracks in the hardline rule of the country.
At best, what would come of this is we put the Iran regime on a pathway to its collapse. That's at best.
As for Israel, a military spokesperson saying today its army is prepared, quote, both defensively and offensively if the U.S. were to strike Iran. Right.
Greg Palcott live in London. Greg, thanks. Senior White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich has the latest live from the North Lawn. Good evening, Jackie.
Good evening, Brett. President Trump denied reports that Israel and Arab states convinced him to hold back. But Iran's exiled crown prince was in Washington today, publicly pleading for the president to take a surgical strike on what he called the Iranian regime's paramilitary assets.
Still on the way, or has your bar
well, we're
for
going to see. As you know, Iran canceled the hanging of over 800 people.
Amid continued pressure to intervene in Iran, President Trump doesn't seem poised for immediate action, but surging military assets to the Middle East could take as long as a week. Democrats calling out his promises.
You know, the president had a lot of bluster over the last couple of days about how he was going to have the backs of these Iranian protesters. I haven't seen much yet. You never know.
Would you support
with
strikes?
This administration. I don't have access to the intelligence that the president has, nor do I know exactly what the options are for him. But I can tell you, if you make a threat like that, you got to be prepared to follow through on it.
U.S. forces still concentrated near Venezuela after Maduro's arrest. Trump still happy working with Maduro's VP, Delcy Rodriguez.
If you ever remember a place called Iraq where everybody was fired, every single person, the police, the generals, everybody was fired, and they ended up being ISIS. But I'll tell you, I had a great meeting yesterday by a person who I have a lot of respect for.
Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, gifting her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump in their first meeting over the objections of the Norwegian Nobel Institute, which says, regardless of what may happen to the medal, the diploma, or the prize money, it is and remains the original laureate who is recorded in history as the recipient of the prize. The decision is final and applies for all time.
Well, she offered it to me. I thought it was a very nice gesture. And by the way, I think she's a very fine woman, and we'll be talking again.
Meantime, some congressional Republicans are drawing a red line on military action to acquire Greenland.
I want to let him know it would probably be the end of his presidency. I think it would lead to impeachment.
As Trump seems to be eyeing another tool.
I may put a tariff on countries if they don't go along with Greenland, because we need Greenland for national security.
Also tonight, the White House detailed who will oversee the reconstruction of Gaza after moving into phase 2 of the peace plan. Topping the list, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Also, a former Palestinian Authority official, Dr. Ali Sha'ath, will oversee the Committee for the Reconstruction of Gaza. The White House called him a respected Palestinian technocrat. Brad.
And Jackie, also today, the White House putting some meat on the bone for congressional Republicans facing voter concerns about health care. What do we know?
Yeah, the White House today pushed the first tranche of the $50 billion rural health care fund. It was established to offset cuts to Medicaid from the big, beautiful bill. This fund, which reportedly every Democratic governor applied for, does give Republicans a response to questions as Congress struggles to coalesce around a comprehensive plan, despite the White House unveiling an outline this week, Brett.
Jackie Heinrich live on the North Lawn. Jackie, thanks.
The U.S. moving military assets closer to Iran in the wake of a deadly crackdown on anti-government protests. The White House says it is keeping all options open.
What I will say with respect to Iran is that the president and his team have communicated to the Iranian regime that if the killing continues, there will be grave consequences. The president and his team are closely monitoring this situation, and all options remain on the table for the president.
Okay, Jennifer Griffin is live in Washington on all of that for us. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Sandra. Well, the president was just asked what convinced him not to strike Iran. He said nobody convinced him. He convinced himself. He said the fact that they stopped the hangings or agreed to stop the hangings had a big impact on him. But the president has also said all options are still on the table, including military options to strike Iran. In the last 24 hours, there are indications that one, if not two, aircraft carrier strike groups could be sent to the Middle East. The U.S. Navy not confirming that the USS Lincoln, which was in the South China Sea earlier this week, is en route. It would take at least a week for it to arrive. Expect to see at least one squadron of stealth bombers deployed, as well as an increase in anti-missile defense systems by land, air, and sea to protect the 30,000 U.S. troops in the region and Israel. Norm Rule served in the CIA for 34 years, focusing on Iran.
The president's approach is actually traditional. He has used a variety of diplomatic tools, which ranges from putting this issue before the UN Security Council today. He's put forward serious sanctions that are just beginning to roll out. And last, the United States already has substantial forces capable of dealing a powerful blow against Iran.
Experts say it would be a mistake to think that a single military strike would cause the regime to fall, but it could destabilize the regime for sure.
I believe we could go in there, disrupt their command and control, shut down their ability to respond, and make significant strikes. Remember that some of the heaviest tonnage came all the way from the United States. It doesn't have to be right there. I think that we would be able to make a significant strike.
Sources tell Fox that if the president does decide to carry out military strikes, they will look different than last summer, bigger and more offensive in nature. Sandra?
All right, Jennifer Griffin on all of that for us. Thank you very much, Jennifer. John?
All right, Sandra, let's bring in John Teichert, retired Air Force Brigadier General, for more on this. The carrier strike group, Abraham Lincoln, headed for the Arabian Sea. What do you make of this? I know that Arab nations, which we have bases, aren't particularly eager to let us launch anything against Iran from there. So what do you make of the Lincoln and its strike group going there?
John, this is an example of help being on the way for the protesters. It gives added options of offensive capability, added options of defensive capability. It's a huge sign to the protesters that we still are supportive of them. And then it also forces the regime to have to consider the external threat in addition to the internal security. And then finally, I think it provides the president options, if he so decides, to provide a blockade of sanctioned tankers like we did in Venezuela to strangle the finances of the regime.
Right. In terms of Arab countries in the region not wanting us to launch from there, what's their concern?
I think part of it is their concerns about stability, oil prices or otherwise, but I don't think they said no. They said no, not yet. I think they had a sense that this week was not the time where strikes would have made the difference for the protesters, but maybe that answer will be different in a week, especially when the carrier strike group is there.
So the urgency to take action against Iran appears to have been dialed back somewhat after the president received assurances from Iran that the killing was going to stop. Here's what he said in the departure just a short time ago.
Urged protesters in Iran earlier this week to keep fighting in the streets and said that help was on the way. Is help still on the way, or has your bar
Well, we're
for
going to see.
intervention
As you
changed?
know, Iran canceled the hanging of over 800 people. They were going to hang over 800 people yesterday, and I greatly respect the fact that they canceled that.
So the fact that the president said it's a red line if they kill protesters, and particularly if they hang protesters that they've captured,
So do you think that military action is off the table right now? Might the president pursue other options in the interim?
I think that the president loves keeping his options open. I think there could be strikes
and
today
playing his
or
cards
next
close
week.
to his vest as well.
But I do think the diplomatic option is important to him. The survival of those detainees is important. But I also think the two added sanction regimes that he applied this week add additional urgency that will hinder the ability of the Ayatollah to continue his finances. And I think that's a big step as well.
So the Iranians are giving the president assurances that they're not going to kill protesters, certainly not going to hang them. But at the same time, the Iranians are playing the old game that they play. Iranian TV, with this less than veiled threat against the president earlier this week, in which they put up a picture from Butler, Pennsylvania last July with the caption, "This time the bullet they're talking about won't miss." I mean, I thought that this would really tick the president off, but apparently he's kind of taking it in stride at the moment.
Well, I think he's maybe holding his cards close to his vest, but I think that he is incensed by what's going on in Iran. He is massively supportive of the protesters, and I think the fact that help is on the way in the form of an aircraft carrier and a carrier strike group is indicative of the fact that the president is maintaining all of his options and keeping them on the table.
I want to quickly ask you about Venezuela before we go. The president met with Maria Corina Machado yesterday. She presented him with a plaque that included her Nobel Peace Prize. But at the same time, the CIA director yesterday was meeting with Delcy Rodriguez, who is the interim president there in Venezuela. There you see the picture. The president, for the moment at least, is putting his chips on Rodriguez. Maybe he's thinking of a slow march to democracy there in Venezuela as opposed to toppling the regime and then a power vacuum ensues. What's your take on that strategy?
John, I think a couple of things. First of all, he clearly is okay with the compliance of the Rodriguez administration thus far, that they have been compliant sufficient to his and our objectives. But I also think he is very concerned about what he saw several decades ago in de-Baathification in Iraq. He mentioned it today in the press conference. And I think that's an example of him making sure that we don't create a power vacuum that would create chaos in the region. And instead, he's very methodical in the stabilize, recover, and transition plan that he and the Secretary of State have outlined.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we decapitated a regime and then engaged in some sort of nation-building effort that just goes to you-know-what in a handbag very quickly?
No, that's right. And I think the stability that Rodriguez provides, at least in the short term, as she is sufficiently compliant, provides the president and the region the ability to make sure that things don't get out of control against U.S. interests.
I would think that we're only on chapter 1 of a long book on Venezuela. We'll see. Thank you very much for joining us, John. Good to see you.
So as thousands of anti-government protesters have feared dead in Iran, the U.S. is sending military assets, including an aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, to the Middle East as President Trump weighs whether or not to carry out a strike. Aisha Hasni joins us from the White House with more. Aisha.
Hey, good morning to you, Brian. Well, you can certainly see here that all the chess pieces are moving around the globe, and we are learning from military sources that the U.S. is sending at least one aircraft carrier to that region right now. We don't know yet if it's going to be the USS Abraham Lincoln that's currently in the South China Sea, or if it's one of the two carriers that just left Norfolk or San Diego earlier this week. Meanwhile, Axios is reporting that the director of Israel's spy agency, Mossad, flew in today to the U.S. for talks with White House envoy Steve Witkoff about Iran, with Senator Lindsey Graham announcing that he is headed to Israel as he calls on the president to take action.
People are being slaughtered in the streets. If that's not a distraction, that's a moment where we need to act. The idea we're dealing with the most vicious regime on the planet, if you don't understand this is the biggest moment for change since the fall of the Berlin Wall, you're missing a lot. This is a religious war.
So the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the president was told an attack on Iran would not guarantee the collapse of the regime. However, yesterday, the Treasury Department announced sanctions on 5 Iranian officials. The president today has a roundtable this morning on rural health. It is open to the press. We'll see if he takes any questions on any further actions in Iran.
All right. Thanks so much, Aisha. Meanwhile, let's bring in retired 4-star General Jack Keane. General, what are our options in Iran?
Well, we have a lot, and I think a lot has already taken place. I mean, clearly the president has made a statement, his credibility is on the line, and listen, when he gives his word, he executes. And that is simply to hold the people that are accountable for what they have done to their own citizens in killing them. That is his promise to the people that have been on the street out there willing to risk their lives, and in thousands of cases, that is exactly the tragedy that has taken place here. So what is likely taking place and what could take place? Well, first of all, we're trying to squeeze Iran in terms of its ability to sell more oil that it's been selling. That has taken place. That's not decisive in itself, but it's an enabler. We're likely helping the protesters communicate better, given the Iranians have shut down the internet. And that's a covert operation to do something like that. Cyber operations likely being conducted against Iranians' command and control systems, their telecommunications, their ability for the IRGC and the Bashi militia who are on the streets to communicate effectively. Also, cyber operations against their surveillance capability of the population itself. All of those are capabilities the United States has that are second to nobody's. Our offensive cyber capability is really something very special. And then we get to information operations. We are likely conducting information operations against the oppressors, the middle-level leaders of the oppressors, the people also carrying the guns. Because if and when, and I believe it's when, kinetic operations are conducted against that organization, against its leaders, we want divisiveness in it. We want that organization to break apart. We want some of them to go over to the side of the protesters, because the reality is the regime is more in trouble as a result of kinetic operations. And then the administration into kinetic operations itself, obviously leaders, obviously the organizations doing the suppressing. But you have to consider what else? Iran's ability to retaliate. Who would they retaliate against? U.S. bases and Israel. So one, let's make certain that the defense of those systems are as good as they can be, and that has to be taken into consideration. And then what do we do about the target set in reducing Iran's capability to conduct those retaliation attacks? These are all things that are laid out to the president and making decisions and options. And obviously that means we would have to expand the target set to make certain we take down some of Iran's ballistic missiles, I assume. I don't know. I don't ask those kind of questions. But just looking at the portfolio and what needs to be done, you always have to consider what is the retaliation that Iran is going to do here. And let's get something straight. The objective of this attack has never been they're going to go to collapse this regime and we're going to get a regime change. I mean, that article, I totally disagree with it. The president has known that from the outset. At best, what would come of this is we put the Iran regime on a pathway to its collapse. That's at best. We don't have an organization to take it over. If there was an organization out there ready to take over the regime, what would Iran do with that? They would be killing them, and they would be putting them in jail and hanging them. So this is a process that's taken place. We're focused on holding the people accountable for what they have done and then putting it on a pathway to so weaken the regime, which is already politically, economically, and military the weakest it has been in 45 years. Our actions here will further weaken it.
18,400 plus arrested, 2,600 have been killed. It looks like that that Bashi group, dressed in plain clothes, along with the Revolutionary Guard, goes into the middle of the crowds and just executes people at close range, piling up the bodies in order to disperse and kill off this unrest, kill off the unrest in the streets that was driven originally by economic means. Lastly, in your entire career since 1979, is this the best chance to get a new regime in there? Even if we're not implementing it, do you believe the momentum is like you have not seen before? Better than 2009, better than 2022?
Oh, yeah, it is absolutely better than 2009 when we did nothing. Certainly better than what took place in 2019, largely economic issues. 2022 dealing with Masha Amini when she was killed. Yes, but of course the regime has reacted considerably more violently than they have done in the past as well. This is a huge opportunity because going in, as I said, the regime has never been this weak.
Right.
And that's fundamentally what's taking place. And the people on the streets understand that. That's why they keep coming out. What the regime is doing right now, they're in all the neighborhood with guns pointing at the houses. Every street has guns out there and not wanting them to get out of the house. If they come out of the house, they're going to shoot them. And that is what is taking place in terms of suppressing the people's ability to get back out on the street.
Right.
President Trump said he's going to hold them accountable. I take him at his word.
General Jack Keane, thanks so much. Appreciate your analysis now more than ever. Thank you. Meanwhile, more Fox and Friends in just a moment.
So now President Trump keeping all of his options on the table after Iran's deadly crackdown on pro-freedom protests. One report estimating 2,700 may have been killed. Wow. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott watching all of that from London. And Greg, what can we say about what's happening there now? Hello.
Bill, hi. The feeling on the streets of Iran, certainly very much against the government, but for the moment at least, things have died down. Things have quieted down, but for how long is the real big question. A stand-in for the Ayatollah Khamenei spoke at Friday prayers in Tehran today. He demanded once again the death penalty for those arrested during the weeks-long riot, saying armed hypocrites should be put to death. Also directly challenging President Trump, calling the protesters Trump's soldiers. More than 2,600 have been killed in the brutal crackdown. It started as a protest against economic conditions and turned into full-fledged rage against the regime. Thousands more injured, even more arrested. Also claimed today hundreds of mosques, prayer halls, hospitals, ambulances damaged. Speaking late yesterday at a special session of the UN Security Council, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, renewed President Trump's threats against Iran, saying that all options are on the table to stop the slaughter. The White House claims its threats headed off hundreds of executions this week. For now, while we're now seeing those generally quiet scenes coming from Tehran, also seeing funerals held for those killed. There are reports of at least scattered unrest, more arrests, and what has also been keeping a lid on things, a nearly complete shutdown this week of the internet, making visuals very hard to come by. And finally, Bill, Fox News confirming more U.S. military assets are being drawn to the region. It's been reported that could include an aircraft carrier group just in case things kick off again, and President Trump wants to act.
Watching it by the hour. Greg, thank you. Reporting in London, Greg Palcott.
And as protests continue to rage across Iran, the U.S. is preparing for potential military action, moving an aircraft carrier to the region. U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz repeated America's commitment to protect the pro-freedom protesters at an emergency UN meeting.
President Donald J. Trump and the United States of America stands by the brave people of Iran. Period. You will hear many today from the Iranian regime and from its friends. The regime is solely responsible for the economic misery of the Iranian people and the repression of their freedom, and they will be held accountable.
Dan Senor is a former foreign policy advisor in the Bush administration. He's host of my favorite Call Me Back podcast. This is Masih Alinejad. I hope I get that correct. She's an Iranian-American activist. She's been on our air many times. She's very close with Martha McCallum. She spoke at the UN yesterday about the Iranian regime. Watch her here.
The Islamic Republic does not limit its crimes within its own borders. They kill their opponents at home and target those who expose their brutality abroad. Here, even here, on U.S. soil. And every corner of the world. Let me be very clear. The Islamic Republic behave like ISIS, and the Islamic Republic must be treated like ISIS.
There's been a lot of maybe hopes for the Iranian people that are protesting that America was on the way, help was on the way. Has that moment passed them by?
I don't think it's passed by. It's just uncertain whether or not it will be there. I still tend to think it will be there. I think this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. This is like a 1989 to 1991 moment for the Middle East, meaning that the hegemon of the Middle East had been Iran. It's been under enormous external pressure over the last 2 years. It's proxy system that had been building up throughout the region. Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas have been largely wiped out. Its client state in Damascus, in Syria, the Assad regime is gone. Its nuclear program is all but gone. So it's been facing extraordinary external pressure, and now it's facing this internal pressure, and that's sort of a perfect storm. with a country that's being led by an 86-year-old leader who's been in power, for almost 40 years. And so he's weak and isolated. And this is a genuine, bona fide, popular uprising from the people. It's like a perfect storm, and you don't get these moments that often. And I do think American military power would do a lot to tip things over.
That notwithstanding, I agree with a lot of what you said there, but I just find this this is hard. And it's almost like you had to take action before they hit the streets and went into protest. And if you listen to Jack Keane earlier today, and many have suggested this, you need members of their secret police force to flip and join the side of the protesters. And so far, that hasn't happened.
And typically that part, when you have a security apparatus that is so loyal to the regime, so loyal to the supreme leader, that is very hard to pull off. Look, Iran is facing enormous economic pressure, something like 50% inflation. If you think about inflation on food, it's closer to 70%. Enormous economic pressure. But the security apparatus has a lot of staying power. They can, and that particularly the Basij, the secret domestic forces that suppress the citizens, and then the IRGC are very loyal to the regime and to the supreme leader. Still. And so it's going to be very hard to get them to flip. I do believe U.S. military force could actually start to change the dynamic. It augments, it's complementary to what's happening with the popular uprising. But I think the popular uprising alone is not enough to break the will and break the control of these security forces. The regime has been investing in these revolutionary forces for 47 years. This is a powerful capability that the regime has, and it's not going to break overnight.
One of the things is that that's not the axis of evil, but you have these bad actors, right? So Venezuela, Maduro was friendly with Iran. That's not an option for Iran anymore. So as you say, they're more isolated. But you said something this morning, and maybe you could tell our viewers here about what our allies in the Middle East are thinking about this moment.
Yeah, so I think I think Israel definitely wants the regime gone, and Israel and Iran had very close relations before the revolution in the late 70s in Iran. So there used to be direct flights between Tehran and Tel Aviv. So there's a real sense in Israel that Iran could be one of the most pro-Israel, most pro-West, most pro-America countries in the Middle East. Many of the Arab countries in the Middle East, though, kind of like Iran where it is right now, meaning they didn't like where Iran was before June of this year when it had its nuclear program in full steam ahead. They didn't like where Iran was when they had this proxy system that they had invested hundreds of billions of dollars in, projecting power, Iranian power throughout the region. But Iran now on its back foot, external pressure and domestic pressure, its economy in free fall, the rial in free fall. This is, some of these countries are worried that if suddenly you get a new government in place, a new system in place, it could be a very modernizing, a very secular, quasi-democratic country. Many of these countries, particularly some of the Gulf countries, don't like that contrast to what they have, because some of their citizens may be saying, why don't we have
like
that?
a lot of what you're saying, but when I hear American military action in Iran right now, I think that means war, and I don't think this White House has the stomach for that. Can I quickly move to Venezuela?
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah,
I think surgical.
Yeah.
What this administration has demonstrated it's capable of doing with great effect. They've learned the best lessons from what hasn't worked with the Bush and Obama administration.
There's a reason why the Israelis said don't do it, and there's a reason why the Saudis and the Qataris said don't go.
Well, the Israelis said not don't go. It sounds like what we understand is the Israelis said, wait, we got to have our ducks in a row before you go, not don't go at all. And again, I think the other actors in the region have other incentives, which is that they're not sure, they like this Iran, where it is right now, paralyzed and in free fall, rather than what could follow it. So I think this administration between Venezuela and Iran so far in this administration, the first administration, what they did to Soleimani, they are capable of very focused, targeted, in and out military operations.
Quickly on Venezuela, do you think it's holding? Do you think it's developing the way that we expected?
I think it's developing in a positive direction. I think the administration is still figuring out what should succeed Maduro, as we've been seeing in the press today. But I think on balance, the place isn't
Do you
collapsing.
think that Delcy Rodriguez or Machado are the one? Which
Yes.
woman is going to lead
Right.
Venezuela?
I think it's one of them or their people. It may not be. I mean, it's not clear whether it's going to be one of them or their followers, but I think it's between one of those two camps. And Look, this is a region that Secretary of State Rubio really, really understands. He's been the driving force of the foreign policy strategy and the kind of decision-making as it relates to Venezuela. And I think it's like I said, who knows if it's going exactly how we thought it would go, but directionally, I think
it holds, right.
And I think it's quite an accomplishment already, what the administration has done with Venezuela.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan Senor,
All right.
around the world with Dan Senor.
Clearly, the president has made a statement, his credibility is on the line, and listen, when he gives his word, he executes. And that is simply to hold the people that are accountable for what they have done to their own citizens in killing them. That is his promise to the people that have been on the street out there willing to risk their lives, and in thousands of cases, that is exactly the tragedy that has taken place here.
That was a really good interview earlier today on Fox and Friends with General Jack Keane. He said a lot of things there, and it sounds like he's bullish on the action right now in Iran. The question is, what do you do, and how do you make it effective? Again, Iraq to the west, Afghanistan to the east, Tehran, the capital city. This is the positioning now for the main aircraft carriers the United States has. The Ford is off the coast of Venezuela. The USS George Washington is here in the South China Sea. We've got another group off the coast of San Diego and one off the coast of Virginia. For all of these assets, it would take about a week to get in position here off the coast of Iran and the Persian Gulf. This is a list now, about 18 different bases, military bases that the United States runs through southern border of Turkey into Iraq and all over Saudi Arabia and Oman. So that's our positioning. Here's Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. In fact, he's in London today, getting a sense of what the Europeans are talking about. Sir, I want you to address what Jack Keane is saying there, but listen to Lindsey Graham on Thursday on the Hill. Watch here.
Okay.
People are being slaughtered in the streets. If that's not a distraction, that's a moment where we need to act. The idea we're dealing with the most vicious regime on the planet who desires to destroy the state of Israel, kill us, purify Islam, make it radical from every pole to every pole is not a distraction.
Okay, what's the answer?
Well, look, I think they both make a good point. I think President Trump is serious when he is expressing those very concerns that Lindsey Graham raised about the people of Iran. They're out there. They are getting arrested. Some of them are getting killed. It is a huge regime crackdown. And I think President Trump is serious about that. As you pointed out, the assets are not all in the region, but even more to that point, if you're in President Trump's shoes, you're saying, what can I do that is effective? I mean, I can launch military strikes. I can hit some of the regime headquarters. Maybe I hit the Ayatollahs. Maybe I hit the governing leadership or the security services. Does that topple the regime? Do they strike out against U.S. presence, U.S. forces in the region, all those bases you pointed out with terrorist attacks? What can I do that I know is going to be effective and that will actually help save those people? Thus far, what President Trump has done is make the threat, try to get them to stop killing people. They did stay some of the executions that were supposed to happen. But then we've got to put some assets in the region. We've got to have a military plan that we can see through from start to finish. And when I say start to finish, I know President Trump doesn't want to do regime change in the sense that we own it, that we are responsible for governing Iran or occupying Iran. He doesn't want that. So it's got to be a limited capability that empowers these protesters to form a different kind of government.
Yeah, one more thought on this. I want to ask you about Venezuela here. What you're saying all there is that this is hard stuff. And I just wonder, like all the criticism directed toward Barack Obama when he missed the window, how much does the president right now think about that? I bet he does.
Well, I don't think that he compares himself to Barack Obama, to be honest. I think he thinks he is far advanced on that. And I think he is serious, that he is actually willing to use force. He's shown that in Iran already. He's shown that in Venezuela. He's made noises about other places. So I think he's willing to use force. But when he does it, I think he just wants to be sure that it will be an effective use. And I don't think we have that in place right now.
Okay, on Venezuela, here we go. Machado was at the White House yesterday and offered her Nobel Peace Prize to the president. Here's how she said about that, described it.
Share with President Trump my profound trust in the Venezuelan people. And I told him that, please trust the Venezuelan people. We are people that love the United States of America. We want to have our children coming back home and work together for the security of the whole hemisphere. And I wanted to convey this to him.
Okay, so the facts on the ground are thus, on the water, I should say, not on the ground. At least half a dozen vessels have been seized off the coast of Venezuela, going back over the past 2 weeks. It seems quiet. Quiet would apparently be good, be a good thing. Do you see it the same way?
Well, I think what I see is we've gotten rid of Maduro, but the regime is still in place. The regime still has a stranglehold on the people, and then we are trying to keep a stranglehold on the regime to get them to do what we want to do. So far, we're starting with baby steps. This is working a little bit. We've been able to control oil flows. They've been able to sell some oil. They've been able to get paid for that. So we're exercising that kind of control. What we really need to see, I'm so glad that President Trump met with Machado. We need to see someone who the Venezuelan people trust and want as their leader, and that Venezuela can again become a normal country. We don't have a plan in place for that right now, but at least where we are so far, Maduro gone, a stranglehold on the regime, trying to work with them. We just have to keep up that pressure, and we have to try to get the pathways through so there will be a transition in power at some point.
Okay, Kurt Volker, enjoy your time there in London, and we'll see what the Euros are saying about us now, huh? Thank you, sir. Kurt Volker, thanks for your time.
Bill. Thanks.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Fox News confirming at least one aircraft carrier is en route to the Middle East, with other military assets from air, land, and sea expected to begin flowing into the region in the coming days and weeks. The White House still leaving the door open, though, for a potential strike.
The president and his team have communicated to the Iranian regime that if the killing continues, there will be grave consequences. The president and his team are closely monitoring this situation, and all options remain on the table for the president. Only President Trump knows what he's going to do, and a very, very small team of advisors are read into his thinking on that.
Senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum and member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Dr. Kanta Ahmed joins us now. Dr. Ahmed, thank you so much for being here. So the president is sending military assets to the region, and all options remain on the table. But there's also this Wall Street Journal report that says President Trump was told an attack on Iran wouldn't guarantee the collapse of the regime. The reporting goes on to say the U.S. officials and Middle Eastern partners told the White House the regime was unlikely to fall after a massive bombing campaign, which could instead spark a broader conflict. Smaller assault packages, meanwhile, could boost morale among protesters, but ultimately not change the regime's crackdown. So taken as a whole, how do you view all of this and where things go from here?
Iran is extremely militarized. The regime is defended by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who are loyalists, fanatics, and actually the prime beneficiaries of Iran's corrupt and excavated economy. It is imperative the United States stands with the Iranian people, and I do believe the president will make the decision to strike ballistic missile launchers, manufacturing capabilities, drone factories, a number of other assets to begin with, which can be readily targeted by the United States without ground troops or any kind of invasion, which would be unacceptable for the president and the American people. Regimes don't die overnight, but this is a dying regime. And if we fail to stand with the Iranian people who are being targeted by snipers, shot in the face and genitals, murdered in their cars, meanwhile, we have an unknown body count which exceeds 10,000, some say 12,000 already killed, then we will go down in history as not standing up for the dignity and nobility for almost 100 million Iranians who deserve better.
Yeah, and that same Wall Street Journal report says that there is also a belief that President Trump could simply just be stalling for time in order to give military assets enough time to move into place. There was also this other report, Dr. Ahmed, yesterday about a phone call that President Trump had with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that reporting says that the Prime Minister encouraged President Trump not to strike right now. And one of the reasons is because he's concerned that a larger conflict could be sparked as a result of a strike, which seems like a unique position for the Prime Minister to take, considering he himself has led the charge on doing that very thing. So what do you think about a potential larger conflict to be manifested after a strike and where the Prime Minister stands right now?
So a couple of things. First of all, while assets and ships are on the way, the United States has an extraordinary military presence and support from the Kurdish part of Iraq, where we have our biggest assets in Erbil. So we are ready to strike with imminent proximity. Secondly, nobody understands the Iranian threat better than Israel, that's been the recipient of Iran's tremendous proxy wars through Hezbollah and Hamas. And so, as well as the disruption of Syria by Iran and Lebanon by Iran, all of which has surrounded Israel with this awful conflicts. However, we don't know what's coming the day after in Iran. But I do have confidence in the Iranian people. They are highly intelligent. They're part of a 5,000-year civilization. Every Iranian that I talk to detests the tyranny they lived under 51 years, I think today, the Shah was forced out of Iran. And so there are many unknowns, but I think the United States is extremely well positioned, and I have every confidence the president is going to take action and make the best decision. However, what's made of that strike is up to the Iranian people. And we also have to remember, Iran has amazing naval assets which control the outflow of oil in the Persian Gulf, and that is extremely worrisome to our Gulf partners and the global energy markets. But we can also manage that. So this is the beginning of the end. An American strike is going to facilitate that, but it is not going to end it overnight.
Sure. Meantime, President Trump and Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado meeting at the White House, where she gave him her Nobel Peace Prize. Watch this.
In spite of the Nobel Prize Committee saying that you couldn't transfer your Nobel Prize to anyone, especially President Trump, you did today. Why did you do that?
Because he deserves it. And it was a very emotional moment. I decided to present the Nobel Peace Prize medal on behalf of the people of Venezuela.
That, of course, Rachel Campos Duffy's interview following that major moment that we all saw at the White House. But listen to this, Dr. Ahmed. A New York Post op-ed explains how capturing Maduro helps the world, saying, quote, what will be the lesson for Xi and Putin of the great Venezuela raid? I would think it's this, that Trump will run enormous risks to protect American interests. Trump has no wish to carve the world like an apple into spheres of influence in which China, Russia, and the U.S. can plunder smaller nations at will. The extraction of Maduro from his Venezuelan fortress has had a domino effect favorable to the U.S., not just in Latin America, but around the world. Dr. Ahmed, explain how toppling Maduro sets up American wins throughout our globe.
I considered this a masterstroke of foreign policy, and really President Trump is to be congratulated. Maria Corina Machado's gesture was extremely touching, but it does represent how the Venezuelan people feel about being liberated from this. This was also the first step in helping dismantle the Iranian regime. Venezuela and Iran had a 25-year agreement of processing crude and refining oil, as well as financing with energy Iran's terror economy. Also, Venezuela hosted Hamas and Hezbollah training camps. Also, Venezuela destabilizes neighboring Colombia, financing the campaign with dirty money of Petro, the ferociously anti-Semitic leader of Colombia that has devastated that country that formerly was an important ally of the United States. So this is tremendous for Latin America. Of course, it's great for the United States. It's very good for energy markets. It makes it much more expensive for Russia to prosecute the Ukrainian war, because now people can access more favorably priced oil globally. And it did not result in a bloody revolution in Venezuela. This government now will be under close scrutiny of the United States, so that living standards and conditions for Venezuelans can improve, which will put pressure on Colombia and Iran and repel Russia and China from the region. Extraordinary. And Marco Rubio gets a lot of credit for helping inform the president.
The hardest working man in the world, Marco Rubio. He has every job. Dr. Kanta Ahmed, we appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.